Hello examiners, and welcome to a video explaining deponents and semi-deponents. Deponents are a bit weird. They're basically irregular verbs and they initially seem very confusing. As a reminder, first of all, we're going to talk about passive endings. So the basic endings for passive is rur, ris, ter, mur, mini, unter. So obviously your present. If you're imperfect, you just stick a ba in front of it, so bar, baris, batter, etc. Remember that for the future, there's two different types depending on what conjugation you're in. So if you're in first and second conjugation, you're going to be using bor, beris, bitter, bimmer, bimni, bunter, whereas third and fourth conjugation is ar, eris, etter, etc. There is then a big dividing line to when you get to the perfect and pluperfect tenses when you use the PPP plus a part of sum or eram. So you end up with words like necatus sum and necatus eram. So this is for passive verbs, that is to say the verb is done to the nominative by the ablative. Deponents are weird. They look passive, but they translate active. They are always deponent. It's not a thing that they can sort of turn on and on by having a different ending. It is a permanent feature of the word. It is basically a form of just an irregular verb. There's just quite a few of them. At GCSE, that is the list. If it's not on that list, it's not a deponent verb. So if it looks passive and it's not on that list, it's just passive. Fine. So some examples. If we have, and say you may want to pause as we go through these to make sure you can get them. So senex pueros ad villam sequitur. The old man is following the boys to the house. So here is following because although sequitur looks passive, it is one of our deponents, so it's going to translate as active. Just normal present tense verb then. Imperator militares hortabatur. The general was encouraging his soldiers. We can see their hortor at the top. Again, it's going to be a deponent, so it looks passive. It's not. Rex deus precatus est. Precatus est even. The king prayed to the gods. We can see precor here. Now, precor, precatus est is one of our two-part passive verbs. As you can see, some people on the internet have slight problems with deponent verbs. But wait, it gets worse. Semi-deponent verbs are a sort of subset of even weirder ones. So deponent verbs look passive and act active. And they always do that no matter what. Semi-deponent verbs kind of alternate between looking normal in sort of present and imperfect and future tenses, but for the perfect and pluperfect tenses, instead of having an e, isti, it type ending, it instead looks passive, which is very confusing. So if we see the sentences here, feminae in via gaudebant, they were rejoicing, that's just a normal active ending. But then in the perfect, the women rejoiced, we can see that's a passive ending, but we're going to translate it as an active. One below, the slave not daring to flee is accustomed or usually works in the field. But then if you put that into a perfect tense, the slave not daring to flee had been accustomed to work in the field. So that is pluperfect passive, but because this is one of those weirdo semi-deponents, you're not going to translate it as passive. Thankfully, at least with gaudeo and soleo, that's fairly obvious because it'd be really hard to make those two verbs passive. You can't be rejoiced. It doesn't really make sense. Audeo is slightly annoying. Also, please note with audeo, it obviously looks a lot like audio, meaning I hear. This is not the same word. It gives us words like audacious, meaning bold. Participles are worth thinking about in particular. Present and future participles are always active, but that's just how they are. So even for deponents, it doesn't change. So we can see our two sentences there. Laborans a normal verb and patiens a deponent verb. They both look the same. They both translate the same. And then in the future, laboratorus and passurus, again, normal and then deponent, but they both look the same and they both translate the same. Perfect passives and perfect actives are where deponents sort of come in. Only deponent verbs can be our box in grey, our perfect active verbs. Nothing else can do that. Everything else is just going to be perfect passive. So in total, deponents are basically irregular verbs. If they're not on this table at GCSE, they're not deponent, so they're just going to be normal. If a verb is deponent, it will look passive and translate active all the time. And semi-deponents, which is just the three there, aldeo, gaudeo, and soleo, are even slightly weirder in that they will look normal in most tenses, but if you're doing something with a perfect tense or a pluperfect tense, they will look passive and translate active. Hope that helps. Thank you very much.